claiming she wanted to celebrate a successful real estate deal she'd just closed. But throughout the meal, she complained about the limitations of dating someone with his income level, comparing him to other men she could have been with who would have been able to provide her with a more exciting and luxurious lifestyle. She told Alex directly that she thought he was wasting his potential by settling for such a mundane job and simple life, that any man worth dating should be working toward bigger and better things. She suggested that maybe they should take a break from their relationship until he figured out how to improve his financial situation and become the kind of man who could give her the life she deserved. Her words were delivered with the same casual cruelty that Lucy had used when discussing their relationship, as if Alex's feelings were completely irrelevant to her decision-making process. Alex sat across from Caroline in that expensive restaurant, listening to her brutal assessment of his worth as a potential partner, and something inside him finally snapped. Not with anger or hurt this time, but with a strange sense of clarity that he hadn't felt since before Lucy had destroyed his faith in love and relationships. Caroline's words were almost identical to the cruel calculations he'd overheard from his ex-fiancée, the same cold evaluation of what a man could provide rather than who he was as a human being. But this time, Alex wasn't devastated by the revelation of someone's true nature. Instead, he felt almost relieved to have confirmation of what he'd suspected about Caroline's motivations for weeks. Her mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the opportunistic, materialistic person she'd been hiding beneath her initial charm and apparent interest in his well-being. Unlike with Lucy, where the betrayal had blindsided him completely, Caroline's rejection felt predictable and somehow less personal. What struck Alex most powerfully in that moment wasn't Caroline's cruelty, but the realization of how differently Emma had been treating him during the same time period. While Caroline had been growing increasingly critical and distant, Emma had been showing him consistent kindness and genuine interest in his thoughts and feelings. She'd never once made him feel inadequate or suggested that his current situation was somehow disappointing or insufficient. Instead, she treated him like someone whose company she genuinely enjoyed, whose opinion she valued, and whose happiness actually mattered to her. Alex looked directly at Caroline and smiled, a genuine expression of amusement rather than the polite mask he'd been wearing throughout their relationship. He told her that she was absolutely right about them being incompatible, that he'd finally realized they wanted completely different things from life and from each other. He thanked her for being so honest about her feelings and expectations, explaining that her clarity had helped him understand some important things about himself and what he was actually looking for in a partner. Caroline seemed surprised by his calm reaction to what she'd clearly intended as a devastating blow to his self-esteem. She'd expected him to argue, to plead for another chance, or at least to seem hurt by her harsh assessment of their relationship's limitations. Instead, Alex seemed almost grateful for her honesty, as if she'd done him a favor by showing him her true colors so clearly. He paid for their dinner without any drama or argument, wished her well in finding someone who could provide the lifestyle she wanted, and walked out of the restaurant feeling lighter than he had in months. The next morning, Alex made a decision that would change everything. He went to Emma's school during her lunch break and asked if she'd like to take a walk with him. They strolled through the small downtown area, past the hardware store where he worked and the bakery where he lived, while he tried to figure out how to explain what he needed to tell her. Emma seemed to sense that something significant was happening, listening patiently as Alex struggled to find the right words for what he wanted to say. Finally, Alex decided that Emma deserved the complete truth about who he was and why he'd really come to Pine Ridge. He told her about his wealthy family, his failed engagement to Lucy, and the public humiliation that had driven him to start over in a place where no one knew his history. He explained that he'd deliberately chosen to live simply and work a basic job because he wanted to find someone who would care about him as a person rather than as a financial opportunity. Emma listened to his story without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding as the pieces of Alex's mysterious background finally fell into place. She asked thoughtful questions about his experiences with Lucy and Caroline, showing genuine empathy for the pain he'd endured and the difficulty of learning to trust people's motivations. Most importantly, she didn't seem impressed or intimidated by his revelation about his wealth, treating it as just another piece of information about his background rather than something that fundamentally changed who he was. When Alex finished explaining his situation, Emma was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing everything he told her. Then she looked at him with those kind eyes that had drawn him to her from the beginning and told him that his story explained a lot about the sadness she'd sometimes seen in his expression, but that it didn't change how she felt about him or their friendship. She said she'd cared about the man who worked at the hardware store and lived above the bakery, and learning about his previous life didn't make her care about him any more or any less than she had before. Over the following weeks, Alex and Emma's relationship deepened in ways that felt completely different from his experiences with both Lucy and Caroline. Emma never asked about his money or tried to get him to change his simple lifestyle in Pine Ridge. She seemed perfectly content with their quiet dinners at local restaurants, their weekend hikes in the mountains, and their long conversations about books, dreams, and the small details of daily life that most people take for granted. What amazed Alex most was how Emma treated his wealth revelation as largely irrelevant to their developing relationship. She didn't suddenly expect expensive gifts or elaborate dates, didn't start hinting about luxurious vacations or costly jewelry she'd like to receive. Instead, she continued to appreciate the same simple gestures she'd always valued: his attention when she talked about her students, his willingness to help her grade papers on weekend afternoons, his interest in her thoughts and opinions about everything from local politics to her favorite novels. Emma's genuine disinterest in his money was both refreshing and healing for Alex. After years of wondering whether people cared about him or his bank account, he'd found someone who had fallen for the person he was when he had nothing to offer but his personality and character. She'd seen him at his most vulnerable and uncertain, had watched him struggle with basic adult responsibilities like budgeting and grocery shopping, and had somehow found those experiences endearing rather than disappointing. But the real test of Emma's character came when Caroline discovered the truth about Alex's background. Someone in town had recognized him from old society photographs online and had shared the information with Caroline, who immediately realized what she'd lost when she dismissed him as financially inadequate. Caroline's reaction was swift and entirely predictable. She suddenly wanted him back, claiming that she'd been testing his character and was impressed by how he'd handled her rejection. Caroline started showing up at the hardware store where Alex worked, bringing expensive coffee and pastries while apologizing for her previous behavior. She claimed that she'd only said those cruel things because she'd been scared of getting too close to someone, that pushing him away had been her defense mechanism rather than her true feelings. She talked about how much she'd missed him and how she'd realized that money wasn't as important as she thought it was. But Alex could see right through Caroline's sudden change of heart. Her apologies were calculated and strategic, designed to win him back now that she understood his true value rather than expressing genuine remorse for the pain she'd caused him. She kept making references to the lifestyle they could share together, the places they could travel, and the experiences his wealth could provide for both of them. Even her apologies were really about what she could gain rather than what she'd done wrong. The contrast between Caroline's opportunistic behavior and Emma's consistent kindness became even more obvious during this period. While Caroline was performing elaborate gestures of remorse and affection, Emma simply continued being herself, supportive, genuine, and completely uninterested in the drama surrounding Alex's revealed identity. She didn't try to compete with Caroline's sudden attention or make Alex choose between them. Instead, she maintained the same steady friendship she'd always offered, letting him know through her actions rather than words that her feelings hadn't changed based on external circumstances. Alex's decision about which woman deserved his trust and affection was remarkably easy to make. Caroline represented everything he'd learned to recognize as fake and manipulative: charm that appeared and disappeared based on what someone could provide, affection that was conditional on financial benefit, and apologies that were really negotiations for better terms. Emma represented everything he'd been searching for without even realizing it: authentic care that remained constant regardless of circumstances, interest in his thoughts and feelings rather than his assets, and a kind of quiet strength that didn't need to perform or compete for attention. The confrontation between Alex and Caroline happened at the same coffee shop where they'd first met months earlier. Caroline had asked him to meet her there, claiming she had something important to tell him about their relationship and her feelings. Alex agreed to the meeting, but not for the reasons Caroline probably expected. He wanted to make sure she understood exactly why her sudden change of heart was too little, too late. Caroline arrived dressed more elegantly than Alex had ever seen her, clearly trying to remind him of what he could have if he gave her another chance. She prepared what sounded like a rehearsed speech about how much she'd grown and changed during their time apart, how she'd learned to value character over material possessions, and how she now understood that Alex was exactly the kind of man she wanted to spend her life with. But Alex cut through her performance with the same clarity he'd used when exposing Lucy's deception at their wedding. He told Caroline that he appreciated her honesty about what she really wanted from a relationship, that her initial reaction to his modest circumstances had shown him exactly who she was when she thought no one important was watching. He explained that people's true character was revealed not when they thought they could gain something, but when they believed they had nothing to lose. Alex told Caroline that he found someone who had cared about him when she thought he was just a hardware store employee with no prospects and no money, someone who had treated him with kindness and respect when doing so couldn't possibly benefit her in any way. He explained that this experience had taught him the difference between genuine affection and strategic interest, between someone who loved him and someone who loved what he could provide. Caroline's reaction to Alex's rejection was everything he'd expected and more. She became angry and defensive, claiming that Emma had somehow manipulated him or taken advantage of his emotional vulnerability. She suggested that Emma was probably just better at hiding her gold-digging tendencies, that no woman would really be interested in a man without considering his financial potential. Her words revealed the depth of her cynicism about relationships and her inability to understand that some people were capable of genuine, unconditional affection. As Alex walked away from that final conversation with Caroline, he felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. He'd successfully identified and chosen authentic love over manipulative attraction, had learned to recognize the difference between someone who wanted him and someone who wanted what he represented. Most importantly, he discovered that the wealth and status he'd been born into were tools that could help him find genuine connections, but only if he was smart enough to use them as tests rather than advertisements. 3 months after his final conversation with Caroline, Alex made the most important decision of his life. He'd been planning it for weeks, thinking through every detail and imagining how Emma might react to what he wanted to ask her. The ring he'd chosen wasn't the biggest or most expensive diamond he could afford, but rather a simple, elegant piece that reflected Emma's understated beauty and genuine character. He'd driven back to the city to buy it from a jeweler his family had used for generations, wanting something with meaning and history rather than just monetary value. The proposal itself was as simple and authentic as their entire relationship had been. Alex took Emma to their favorite hiking spot in the mountains, a quiet clearing where they'd spent countless afternoons talking about their dreams and fears. As they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Alex told Emma that she taught him what real love actually meant, that she'd shown him the difference between being wanted for what he could provide and being cherished for who he truly was. When he pulled out the ring and asked Emma to marry him, her reaction was everything Alex had hoped it would be. She didn't gasp at the size of the diamond or immediately start planning an elaborate wedding. Instead, she looked into his eyes with tears of genuine joy and told him that she'd been hoping he would ask, that she couldn't imagine building a life with anyone else. Her acceptance was about their future together, not about the lifestyle his proposal represented or the financial security it offered. Emma's response to learning about the kind of wedding Alex could afford was characteristic of everything he'd grown to love about her. When he explained that money wasn't an issue and that they could have any kind of celebration she wanted, Emma surprised him by saying she prefers something small and intimate. She wanted their wedding to be about their commitment to each other, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about their happiness rather than those who were impressed by the spectacle they could create. The wedding planning process was a complete contrast to Alex's previous experience with Lucy, where Lucy had demanded the most expensive venue, the most elaborate decorations, and the longest guest list possible. Emma focused on personal touches that would make their day meaningful. She wanted to write her own vows, to have a ceremony in the small church where she'd been teaching Sunday school, and to celebrate afterward with a simple reception in the community center where she'd organized countless school events. What touched Alex most deeply was Emma's insistence on paying for parts of the wedding herself, despite knowing that the cost was insignificant compared to his resources. She wanted to contribute her own money toward their flowers and her wedding dress, explaining that it was important to her to feel like an equal partner in their celebration rather than a recipient of his generosity. Her desire to maintain her independence and contribute to their shared life